Welcome to the Hard Truth Podcast. This is Jeremy Fouts. In today's episode, we have a treat for you. We have a self-awareness expert. Yes, we talk about nutrition a lot, fitness a lot, mindset, but we have a self-awareness expert. Today, we are going to be talking about anger is emotion. A good friend of mine from North Carolina, Chris, former Army Ranger, is with us today. And he is the expert that is going to be sharing with us what we need to do, from men and women perspective to understand self-awareness. So it's an honor and a privilege to have you on the podcast today, Chris. And, first I want to say thank you for your service. A lot of people do not know what people like you and the people in the past has done to give us freedom here in the United States of America. And thank you for that. So let's jump into the podcast today. I'm going to be taking notes too, Chris. This is not my expertise when it comes to anger is emotion, talking about relationships, talking about, self-awareness. I'm probably a little bit knowledgeable on that, but I'm probably the typical 48-year-old man that really has been taught not to talk about emotions, not to communicate well with others, unless it's a working arrangement, something like that. So I'm going to be taking notes too. Thank you for giving our audience today the knowledge and wisdom that you are going to provide. Share with us a little bit before we get into the topics today. Share with us a little bit about your background. What has moved you from being a former Army Ranger, or even how did you even get into that former Army Ranger position to where you are now helping, hundreds, if not thousands of people deal with emotions on a daily basis?
Let's go! What up? So it all begins in Chicago, Illinois, where I grew up. As a kid, obviously played lots of sports, and that starts developing the consistency, the habit, the discipline that you need in life in general. And once I started getting ready for college, I said it's a natural progression to continue that going into college and try to become a fitness nutrition expert there, because it was what I knew, from sports and all that. So decided to get some degrees there, and when I got out of college in 2004, the fitness and nutrition industry just was not big. It wasn't booming. There wasn't a whole lot of money to be made there. I found myself struggling and actually looking at the raw end of a divorce. So I said, you know what? It's time to join the military. It's time to hop on that train because I'd always wanted to serve. And obviously it was 2004. So the war was going on in both Afghanistan and Iraq at that point. So I decided to serve. And, I wanted to do the hardest of the hard. I didn't want to go in being a cook and then regret later that I didn't try to see how far I could push my mind and my body. So I said, give me an airborne ranger contract. And I got in, started learning how to do things, and decided it was time to go to ranger school itself, because airborne ranger isn't necessarily the same as going to ranger school. They're two separate things. But I decided to go to ranger school, and then shortly after I became a ranger instructor. And I found, like, I would call it my purest form of my own passion is that, like, teaching people how to push past their limits when they don't think they have anything more in the tank, and how to smash that barrier and to be successful and productive on the other side of it. So I love doing it, love being an instructor. Hell, I told people if I could be an instructor for the rest of my life, I probably would have stayed there. But the Army only says 3 years and you're moving on. But at the end of that time, at the end of the wars, I said, you know what? It's time to move on. The military was for me when it was wartime. After that, I just didn't feel like I had a place in the military anymore. Like, I always said I was that fire extinguisher behind the glass. In case of war, break glass, pull me out and send me in, coach. That was me. But the war was over. It was time to move on to a new industry, essentially. So went into public utilities, found myself in a very similar position because all of my military leadership training directly translated into being a leader in pretty much any industry, but more so in labor industry. So wherever there was a lot of heavy lifting going on, and it was great to be able to take people from like a day one person straight out of high school, never done a labor job, to becoming operators and foremen and supervisors, even in some cases. And there was a lot of satisfying moments in that, right? But I still didn't feel like, hey, this is what I wanted to do. So I got back into doing some fitness and nutrition coaching. It was always kind of a side hustle, it wasn't there for anything, to make a whole lot of money. And I found myself having tons of clients asking me if I would give them advice on other stuff. And at first I was like, I'm not really qualified for any of that. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I barely know what I'm doing with my own life. But as I brought one of my clients on to be a life coach, like client essentially, I realized that the military set me up for success because they teach all of those coaching techniques, how to set up coaching sessions, because we have to counsel our own soldiers once a month and sometimes once a week. So I started realizing I had a knack for being able to help people process through what they were going through. Well, as I started to let those clients, it was like one client turned into two, turned into four, turned into 10, full docket now at 20 to 30 clients a week. And I started realizing that, hey, I have a knack for figuring people out and then just asking the right questions to get them to find their own motivators to be able to get past a lot of the things that they had been stuck in loops for like years doing the same things and not realizing what their behaviors were really saying about what they were going through. We help them process through it. And I've got clients that they're best friends now that used to be clients, and I've gotten to a point where they are fulfilled in life. They're doing great. They're successful in the areas they wanted to be successful in, and it's been an amazing journey up to this point. I never thought 3 years ago that I would have a full on coaching business where I'm planning retreats next year for relationships, for confidence, for self awareness. I've got all sorts of stuff in the works for next year. If you had told me this was going to happen 3 years ago, I would have thought you were crazy. But now look at me here.
Well, you can definitely sign me up for those conferences. I'll be there, Chris. I tell you, I'm a big believer in hiring a coach, working through different issues that you're having in life. I've got coaches that I hire. I'm a big believer. Like, my son wants to be a quarterback. It's good to have a quarterback coach, but have you, from a man's perspective, though, I think sometimes it's hard for us to open up our emotions, to open up and really learn about self. And what are some of the things that you see most men are struggling with? And I know you probably work with women as well, but I can only talk from a man, and it's not really something that becomes comfortable, at 48-year-old to say, hey, Chris, I want to talk to you about this or about that. And how do you help those men overcome that fear, I guess, of wanting to talk about this? And truly, that's where freedom is going to be, right? Is talking, figuring out self. What are some of the practices you'd work with someone, and helping them through? Which, again, you don't have to go into big time detail. I want everybody to use your services because I believe in them. But what are some of the things that you are working with these men, and what kind of issues do you see with men of not really wanting to open up?
Well, the first thing I always talk with every one of my male clients, because you're right, I do coaching for both women and men. But the men that come in, the first thing we start doing is just learning how to name emotions. From a very early age, we get told to stuff our emotions down. Quit your crying, keep moving. It's not that bad. So we get told that we don't have to have emotion. Like, you don't need emotion to live life. And so a lot of them can't even name it. They've gone so long that they have no idea what emotions are out there. And they'll be the first to tell you, well, I'm not emotional. Yet they're the first people to get angry at every little thing that they don't like. And I'm like, I pointed out and I'm saying, you realize anger is an emotion, right? And they're like, no, it's not. I'm like, it's one of the six core emotions. And once they have that aha moment that they're only able to express one emotion, they're like, well, now I feel kind of weak that all I can express is one. I have no idea how to do all the other ones, right? It's a comfortable emotion. Anger is comfortable to men because we know what it feels like. We don't know what the other ones feel like. So we typically, because we compartmentalize so easy, we just put everything in the anger box at that point. We don't even talk about the other emotions. So we just, it's anger is what is the front for fear. It's what disappointment is, just anger. We just get angry at things we don't like. Once we start realizing, and I don't have my men immediately go to their wives and girlfriends and start expressing themselves. We
Right.
work for a good 6 to 8 weeks to start having conversations, just me and him. Like, where are your emotions at? What does this feel like? And then just having that empathy, like, man, I've been there too. And that's the other thing, is that men think we're alone in some of these emotions. And
Yeah.
once they discover, like, hey, I've been through that too, you know, because I'll open up. The way I connect with my clients the most is to say, hey, look, I've been through stuff too. I've been shot at, I've been blown up, I've lost a good buddy in combat. I've been in an abusive relationship. And as soon as I tell these men that I've been physically abused, they take a step back and they're like, well, if this guy can share about this, and I share about it very plainly with them. I don't go like, oh my gosh, I don't go crazy about the emotion, but they see me as an example of how to express that emotion that, I'm disappointed in myself more than anything that I chose that relationship. As they start to see me open up and they see the empathy for what they're going through, it gets much, much easier for them to look at what I call the emotional wheel and pick out what they're feeling. And then we describe it, we talk about it, we process through it, right? And that way we can leave that emotion in the moment and move on with our lives. But when we bottle it up, you ever heard the expression like emotions are like a Coke bottle? Like if you bottle it up and
Oh yeah.
you shake it, as soon as you open it up, it's going to come out roaring. Well, that's why anger is there, because it's the Coke bottle being opened up and we lash out, we hurt the people that mean the most to us, right?
Yeah.
So men are typically, they're closed off to begin with, but once they realize they can express those emotions without hurting their partner, they get much more comfortable learning their emotions so they can express them in a much healthier manner.
So do you think a lot of men, what are some other reasons why they have a hard time opening up? You think maybe some things in the past has maybe kept them from wanting to open up to trust someone else, or what have you seen working with these clients?
Absolutely. I a lot of times I'll trace it back to one single person. It's typically somebody they dated very early on in life, in like a high school, like a high school sweetheart. And we don't understand enough about attachment, at that age to really understand what we can and can't do, where we should be at with trust and all those things. So we attach, and I mean, how many of us can say that like in high school we were like, I'm so gonna marry this woman, right? We get overly attached and extended into that relationship, and then we do open up and we are vulnerable with that person, and we get crushed when they leave us for somebody else, or I go to this college, they go to that college, and we just grow apart, right? And so we get crushed by having opened up, and then our feelings get crushed to where we're like, I never want that to happen again. And these men that have been crushed by that one woman in their past will go, I mean, years, and they're like, they still think of that one from high school. It's still the girl that got away. It's still the one they think of more than anything. And that is the root cause of why they won't open up, because they're so afraid of getting that happening to them again.
Man, that's powerful. I mean, I know so many different people that I've worked with, and I really work with them on fitness and nutrition and mindset. But they've talked about these different things, but I really didn't know how to help them or go back and point out that root cause. And it makes sense. I mean, I've dealt with that with a lot of men that I'm working with. Again, not on a relationship standpoint. I know one of the things that I really love every bit of your content. I encourage everybody to go follow your Instagram handle, but you made a comment on one of your reels that said learn to spot those that were with that their words, not actions. You can't just look at their words, you have to look at their actions and make sure that they align. And I did a bad job sharing that, but you help me out here on
Yeah.
your what to look for in people, whether it be someone you're working with, maybe a spouse, I know, any type of relationship.
Yep. So
Don't just listen to the words, basically.
So I always talk about trust with human beings, which is what you're getting at, right? We need to
Right.
trust our actions. We need to trust other people. And trust comes down to behavioral pattern recognition. Okay. So if you want to know if somebody's trustworthy, you have to look at their behavior, not their words. Because like for an example that I use a lot is, if I was going into dating and I'm talking to this woman and she's like, I'm in the gym every morning, I'm consistent with what I do, I say, okay, I'm going to believe those words, but now I'm going to look, how often do you go to the gym? What's your nutrition look like? I'm not telling them I'm watching for it, but I'm looking at what they're feeding their body, how many times they're in the gym. Because if they tell me they're very health conscious, yet they only go to the gym once a week, their actions are not lining up with their words, right? But a lot of us typically we take what people say to us at face value. That's not meaning I'm going fact checking them and I'm like searching on the internet for information, but it just means that I have to watch their actions from that point forward. And I probably always will. So that way I can watch when there's behavior changes. Because trusting someone is trusting that when I do or say this, they are going to do or say this, right? And that trust gets lost when we don't have that. And why does it get lost? Because we were looking for their words and their actions never met their words. So I get in a position with most of my clients that, okay, what are the things you're having a hard time trusting these people with? And when they tell me what they're having a hard time trusting them with those things, I say, okay, well, let's look for behaviors that either support or discount what you're talking about. And they start looking and they're like, oh my gosh, I see it now. I should have never trusted them in the first place because they believed that they were that person, but never looked for the actions to line up with it. Right. And
Yeah.
it's what causes that disconnect that makes heartbreak so bad is when they said they were going to be there forever, and then they clearly weren't when they cheated on us, right?
Yeah.
Or they left us without warning. So it creates that disconnect that makes it very hard to get over at that point.
Yeah. But I bet you probably are working with these clients, and also before we go talk to that individual about their words not aligning with their actions, you probably really grab that individual you're working with and make them look at self as well. Is that right? Is that what your biggest
Absolutely.
focus is?
Absolutely. Because the other part of the equation is I always tell them if somebody's actions upset you, it says a lot about you too at the same time. We need to
Right.
understand why that action upset us, right? So men typically, like I said with emotion, we will express emotion as anger when we're afraid to confront what's behind it, right? So I will grab especially with the men clients, not so much with the women. They typically
Right.
will internalize a lot of their stuff, but the men are quick to go, I'm going to go tell her off. I'm going to go tell her
Right.
I'm done with her. I'm like,
Yeah, that's why I said that.
yeah, I was like, no, you don't want to do that, buddy, because you might be losing a very good person. You're putting your own thoughts into why that hurt you. And a good example of this is like, and Instagram and Facebook are dangerous for this exact reason. We all know somebody that's like, oh, and he was liking all these girls' photos, or she was liking all these guys' photos. Well, we have to understand if that's upsetting you, that means it's how we relate to it too. So that what that means is that if I like a bunch of girls photos, it means I like her. That means when I see somebody else do it, I'm relating my behavior to them. But that's not always the case, right? If we don't under if we go into it not looking to understand, then we're gonna be crushed every time. So I had a client, he got super upset. He's like, "Oh, she's liking all these guys' photos, and I'm pissed." I said, "Calm down." I said, "There's probably something more logical behind it." He didn't wait for me to tell him or wait for me to help him process through it. He went and told her off and broke up with her. Turned out the guy that she was liking all the posts, it's her brother. But he was so quick, right? Because he didn't think of any other perspective. But it all goes back to he saw her actions in a certain light based on what he is relating to it, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
when
So you're probably saying that he was sitting there liking all these other girls' Instagram photos and different things and just automatically assume that that's what she was doing.
exactly. And that's exactly it because that means that if he was doing it, then he's already guilty of it. We call that projection. And men,
Okay.
our energy naturally is projecting. That's what makes us great at leaders, right? But it gets in a very dangerous position when we project our emotions using anger only. So, what he's really saying is, I'm afraid that she is liking another person instead of being with me. That means that I have a lack of confidence in my ability to keep that woman in my life. But instead of expressing it, saying, look, I see you liking all these guys' photos. It kind of worries me and makes me think that you don't want to be with me anymore. Right? He lashes out in anger. You
Right.
liking all these guys' photos and, what am I, chopped liver? He's defending against that emotion by covering it with another emotion at that point. Right. And so once him and this man and I will start like unpacking all that and processing. And he's like, well, why don't I have the right to yell at her over that? I was like, because you're doing the same thing. So you can't shame that person for something you're doing. And once we start getting that and pulling that root cause out, some of that pain starts to go away because he learns how to express that by instead of expressing it in an angry way, which gets nowhere, he expresses, hey, this worries me and makes me feel this way. And typically that woman will warm up. She goes, oh, I didn't even know I was doing that. Or I didn't even see your side of it. And she'll completely change her tone. But men don't know that that's going to happen. They're so worried about the fear that they cover it with anger.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure you did a really good job of helping these men also really look at insecurities. I mean, that's I think a lot of that, I'm not an expert like you, but I think a lot of these men that are not doing what you're teaching them of self-awareness and taking care of those insecurities, it's easier for them to snap at someone else. Is that what you see?
Yeah. Well, and anger comes from a few different places, but for men that are typically angry all when I say all the time, I'm saying like 2 or 3 times a day they're lashing out at something.
Right.
I tell men you need to get help because that's actually a sign of male depression. Women
Okay.
depression, they cry. Men in depression, they get angry because anger creates a testosterone boost for men, right? The adrenaline pumps up, our heart rate is up. We feel like we're in a fight. We feel like we're doing what we were designed to do as animals, which is fight something, right? Well, that being on our front foot kind of feeling makes us feel good. But what it's doing is covering a weakness behind it. We don't like feeling weak. We hate that feeling. We don't want to say that's why we don't ask for directions. That's right why we'll never admit we're wrong, right? It's because we're afraid of weakness. So once we start realizing that, we realize that all of our anger is covering weakness, and the weakness is that we're depressed because we're not getting what we want. But we're not getting what we want because we're not communicating that to anybody. Once
Yeah.
we start communicating it, we get what we want, and we finally can start removing that shame that we have attached to that depression that's there. But for the guys that get angry just occasionally like once a week, maybe a little bit less, those are the guys, it's a natural emotion to have anger, right? Because it's
Right.
telling you you're unhappy with something. You have a displeasure, but we have to be able to express why we're displeased at that. But then
Yeah.
you have the other men that are it's what I call habitual, like maybe once or twice a week they're getting angry, and it's usually it doesn't match what the situation is, right? And this is like the your boss comes to tell you, "Hey, you didn't clock in." You're like, "What? What?" And you get all mad at him like, "What do you mean I didn't clock in? I always clock in." He's covering that emotion that he has not expressed to say his girlfriend, right? It's displaced. He had a fight with his girlfriend. He didn't express any emotion. He comes to work. He does something wrong. And now he's going to cover it with anger instead. That
Yeah.
means that he's got an emotion that he has not yet expressed to whoever it is he has to express it to. And then it comes out in other realms, right? So
Yeah.
there's a little bit different of angers depending on where they're at. But learning to express it, whatever emotion is behind it, is the key to getting that anger to go away at that point.
Yeah. How hard is it for men? I know you mentioned, the past relationships, high school sweetheart that keeps us from opening up. But what does the time frame that you work with clients to get them to understand communicating and how to open that up? I know it's different every person. Some it's one session, some it's two, three, four probably. But why is it so hard for us to continue that communication channel and to start that opening up process and to continue to be able to evaluate self and to just say, hey, here's my needs, here's my emotions, here's what I'm feeling. What are some of the other things that you maybe help those men overcome that quicker?
Well, the first thing I say is I'm not going to tell you to bite the entire apple in one bite. I'm going to take small bites of it, right? And I always bring everything back to the same concepts that we talk about in fitness and nutrition. It's consistency over time, right? I don't care if you're taking 100 steps or one step. The person that's taking one step every single day gets further than the one guy that takes 10 steps every 30 days, right? So it's one of those things I tell them we're going to start small and we're going to slowly build into it. I wouldn't ask you to suddenly start opening up no more than I would ask you to like do a new exercise and throw 200 pounds on you. If you've never squatted before, I'm not going to throw twice your body weight on you. So I'll
Right.
start with just the bar and make sure I got the movement pattern right. And then we progress into more weights over time. Same thing here. We want a little bit of stress to begin with and then slowly build that into bigger stress. So what I do with men is I say, okay, we're not gonna start expressing our emotions to your girlfriend first. We're gonna
Right.
use somebody that you're comfortable with that you can start doing that with. Say, for example, your mom, your father. We're gonna go to maybe people at work that you can open up just a little bit, right? We get comfortable with the process of how it should sound when we talk that way, because the words "I feel" are the hardest words to get a man to say. They always want to immediately blame the other person for what they did to cause that feeling. So saying the words "I feel this way when you do this" is very hard. But if I can get them to start understanding just that little wording process and get through it with somebody that they already trust, they're already comfortable with, and reframe how they talk about it, then we start slowly building that into the relationship. And then I tell them, I'm like, we're not going to attack your big issue with your girlfriend first or your wife. We're going to attack a small issue, something that just kind of irks you, that you want to say it makes you feel something, and just express that and slowly test the water. I don't ask you to jump in a pool. You're going to test the temperature. You're going to kind of put your toe in it and be like, is it warm? Is it cold? Right? Same thing here. We test that water with our girlfriend by using something small to open up first and see how she reacts. Because the other portion of it is that we need to trust that other person. Well, to build trust, we don't start and go immediately trust them with everything. We trust at a small level first and slowly build it. So the same way we would build muscles is where we build this resilience to that stressor over time, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. That's why you're the expert and I'm not, Chris. I just jump right into it and it'd be a fight, and that's why I'm not the expert. I tell you, it's been an honor and a privilege to have you on today. And I know, I definitely put my stamp of approval on you and understanding that anger is emotion. And, for men, I'm 48. I've never really heard the content that you put out before. And I've never really had a therapist or anything like that, and kind of looked at that as, oh, I don't know if that's necessary for me. But after diving into your content and listening to you today, I'm gonna be reaching out to you for myself, to be able to improve. I feel like all areas of life you can improve, but we hear so much about fitness and nutrition and mindset, but this, I think, is keeping so many men for their full potential, is not understanding the and how to articulate emotions. Have you saw, the clients you're working with, that maybe they've got a lot of these areas figured out, but this is what's keeping them from going to that next level in life?
Absolutely. So, and I'll liken it again back to fitness and nutrition. Where it all kind of started was that I'd have fitness and nutrition clients that are like, I need to get better with my mindset. Like I'm good in the gym, but they were still holding on to fat in certain areas. And we know that holding on to cortisol is a stress hormone, right? So
Right.
we understand that it's a holistic view. So those clients, as I started to process through their emotions with them, they started to release a lot of that stress and get better at communicating, and suddenly they were actually able to shred down to where they wanted to be. They got down from like 20% body fat or 18 down to like 11 or 12% body fat, and they were much happier. But they had been stuck in that loop where no matter how much nutrition expertise they had, no matter what supplements they were taking, no matter what workout they were doing, they just couldn't shed that last little bit. But it all came down to what's up here, because this controls our hormones, which also plays a huge role in how our bodies, how they're healthy, essentially, right? Like it has a huge impact on weight, on our way our stomach digests, even, right? There's so many aspects to it. So you're right. Like it's so critical to us having a more fulfilled life in every aspect to get our minds right first.
Man, you definitely have got me convinced, Chris, as I'm sitting here thinking about this. I mean, I talk to people about sleep and what it does when you hit the REM sleep and the deep sleep, and how, it affects your hormones and all these different things. But I can imagine there's thousands and thousands, millions of men. Again, I can't speak from a woman's side, but that's holding on to all these emotions, which is affecting their sleep and affecting all these areas of their life, and that's really limiting a lot of what they can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sad that we look at things from a small perspective, because we're all looking for that magic pill, right?
Right.
We're looking and we're looking for the quick fix in every scenario. Like if I just do this diet for 30 days, I'm going to lose the weight. If I just do this workout plan for 30 days, I'm going to lose the weight. But you and I both know, after being in the fitness industry, everything is going to go to a point where you have to maintain it, and you
Oh yeah.
can't get rid of those habits and say, okay, well, I've got to where I want to be. Everybody talks about this emotional healing and these mental like health healing, right? Healing is not, it's not linear, but at the same time, once you get to a point where you're good, you don't lose those tools that you learned and how to process, how to define emotions. But a lot of people do. They try to get there like, oh, I went to therapy for 6 months and it worked and now I'm better. and they end up toppling back over because they don't remember all those tools that they learned in their therapy sessions. But the reason why coaching works for men better than therapy, because you said it earlier, you said, I don't know if therapy is really where I need to go. Men, typically, we're forward looking creatures anyways. We're always looking for the next challenge, the next thing to do, right? Women typically do better with therapy because it's backward looking. It's trying to heal that trauma from the past. With what I do, it's kind of right in the between the two of them though, because I'm giving them tools to walk forward, but I'm also saying every once in a while we look in that rearview mirror, we say what went wrong in the past and how can I learn from that so I can do better in the future, right? And that's where these men start getting unlocked and they really start finding massive changes in both how they act at work, how they act in the gym, how they act with their partners. There's massive gains that happen, and it's like you flip a switch with them just by getting them to start processing their emotions and understand themselves better.
Man, that was a great analogy, Chris. That helped me out tremendously. I was sitting here thinking, like my son with a quarterback coach, they might say you threw that one bad ball, but they don't put all their time focusing on that. They then now say, here's what we need to do to throw a good ball. And that's what makes your coaching services so valuable. You might have to go back in the past and say, this is where it stems from, but then you say, here's what we do moving forward. That's powerful. That's powerful.
Absolutely.
Well, Chris, I tell you, it's been an honor and a privilege to have you on the Hard Truth podcast. And, your message definitely aligns to the audience of not only the Hard Truth audience, but, the world today that are dealing with understanding that anger is emotion. If I'm listening to the podcast, which I'm going to be reaching out to you personally, but if I'm listening to the podcast, what's the best way to learn more about your coaching services and how to follow you to continue to get good content to learn from you?
Okay, so for anyone that actually wants any actual coaching, it's www.tncoachingcollective.com. Otherwise, you can find me on Facebook or Instagram. On Instagram, I'm at True North Motivation. On Facebook, it's just my first and last name, Chris Barthelme. Probably have to have you put it in the notes or something so someone can
We'll
find it
put it
because
in the
that's
notes.
a jumble of words. But if you find my Instagram, you're going to find everything else. Or if you find my website, it's got links to my Facebook and my Instagram right there at the bottom.
Well, Chris, it's been an honor and a privilege, and I cannot wait for the audience's feedback from this episode. Anger is emotion. Thank you guys for joining the Hard Truth Podcast. Share this with a friend or a family member. I'm 48. I've never heard his style of coaching. I've been in the leadership world for 25 years, and I have found someone that can definitely make an impact in a lot of people's lives. Don't be bashful of sharing this information with a friend or a family member. And don't forget to leave us a review. Thank you guys for joining us. Good day and God bless.
Let's go.